Welcome to this deep dive. If you are joining us today, we really want to start by welcoming you into a safe, calm, and deeply supportive space.
Yeah, we are so incredibly glad that you're here with us.
Okay, let's unpack this. The mission for our time together today is to explore a stack of incredibly profound sources. We're drawing from expert insights, some really courageous survivor testimonies, and the foundational healing strategies outlined in the text, The Courage to Heal.
And it's such vital material.
It really is. Our goal is to thoroughly, gently understand the journey of recovering from childhood trauma, specifically sexual abuse. We're going to take this slow. We are going to walk through this together, honoring the gravity of the subject matter while keeping our eyes firmly fixed on the horizon of recovery.
And before we go any further into these materials, I want to emphasize something crucial for anyone listening.
Absolutely.
While the material we're exploring today is heavy, and while the pain it touches upon is very real and very valid, the ultimate message we want to share with you is one of profound hope.
Yes, hope is the anchor here.
You might be listening to this deep dive to better understand yourself, your own history, or your own physical and emotional responses. Or perhaps you're here to understand someone you deeply love, someone who is navigating this path right now.
Right.
Whatever brought you to this audio today, we want to assure you of this one thing. Healing is not just a theoretical possibility. It is a richness waiting to be claimed. It's a fundamental reclaiming of your life, your body, and your future.
I am so glad we are centering on that word. It is a richness. And because we are diving into deep waters today, we want to remind you right now and throughout our time together that you are entirely in control of this experience.
Completely in control.
We're exploring deep emotional territory and, your nervous system might react. If it does, please know that you can pause this audio, you can take a deep breath, you can step away, go for a walk, have a glass of water, and return to this deep dive tomorrow, next week, or whenever you feel truly ready.
There's no rush at all.
There is absolutely no timeline you need to follow and no rush to absorb all of this at once. Your safety and your comfort in the present moment are the most important things right now.
That sense of agency is so important. Taking it at your own pace is the very first step of taking back your power. You are in the driver's seat.
So, with that foundation laid, let's explore where this journey actually begins. It starts with the conscious decision to heal. Choosing to face the pain of the past is a monumental, life-affirming act of bravery.
It really is.
It is a commitment that every single survivor deserves to make for themselves, regardless of how much time has passed since the trauma occurred.
What's fascinating here is how that commitment actually arises in a person's life. From the testimonies and psychological insights we've reviewed, it rarely happens in a vacuum. A survivor doesn't usually just wake up on a random Tuesday and casually decide to dismantle their entire coping structure.
Right. It's rarely that simple.
Sometimes the catalyst is a crisis, a sudden wave of anxiety, a breakdown in a significant relationship, or even a physical health scare. Other times, it's triggered by a major life milestone.
We see that so often in the source material. We see stories of people deciding to heal because of a profound life change, getting married and realizing they want to be fully present for their partner, or having a child who suddenly reaches the exact age the survivor was when their own abuse began.
Oh, that's such a powerful trigger.
That can be a staggering mirror to look into. Or sometimes it's as quiet as a trusted friend gently pointing out that the survivor seems disconnected or constantly on edge. And then sometimes there is no external catalyst at all. Sometimes it's simply an innate human compulsion, a deep, persistent drive within the spirit to be whole, to seek relief from a pain that has just become too heavy to carry for one more day.
And that heavy carrying is often disguised as normalcy. The text uses this beautiful, resonant metaphor that really captures this. It compares surviving trauma to living your entire life in black and white.
I love that metaphor.
When a person is just surviving, just utilizing every ounce of energy to cope with the day-to-day, they get used to that monochrome existence. They adapt to the black and white. They might even look around and think, well, this is perfectly fine. This is just how life is.
Yeah, they accept it as their baseline.
But healing, the text compares healing to putting on 3D glasses and seeing the world in full color. It's the first time you see your life in Technicolor. Healing brings the vibrant color, the sound of the birds, the vividness of the flowers, the actual literal feeling of the warm sun in your skin back to life. Coping is merely surviving, but healing is actually living.
But transitioning from that black and white existence into full, vibrant color isn't a gentle, cinematic fade. Often it's abrupt, It's jarring and completely overwhelming. The sources refer to this initial phase as the emergency stage.
The emergency stage.
This is such a critical concept for us to unpack. When you finally make the decision to heal, or when long-buried memories first break through the surface of your consciousness, it rarely feels like a quiet, peaceful revelation.
It feels chaotic. The text uses an analogy that is so deeply visual and accurate. It compares the emergence of traumatic memories to opening one of those thin plastic raincoats that come tightly folded up in a tiny, vacuum-sealed, 2-inch square package.
Oh, yes. The plastic raincoat.
When you're surviving, your trauma is in that tight little package. But once you open it up, once that seal is broken and the plastic expands and catches the air, you can never, ever fold it neatly back inside that tiny package again. It takes up space, it crinkles, it's awkward and massive.
If we look at this from the survivor's perspective, it raises such an urgent question. What does a person actually do when the healing process feels less like a recovery and more like a natural disaster?
It's a terrifying feeling.
Survivors in the text describe this specific stage as being caught in a twister, swept up in an avalanche, or standing on a volcano that is actively erupting. How do you cope when your defenses are down, your memories are expanding like that raincoat, and you feel like an exposed raw muscle just trying to walk around and function in the normal world?
It is terrifying, and we want to gently normalize this specific terror for anyone listening. If you have felt this way, if you have felt entirely consumed by the past, you are not alone, and more importantly, you are not doing anything wrong.
You're not failing at this.
Exactly. You aren't failing at healing. The author Toni Morrison has a profound quote mentioned in our source material that speaks directly to this sensation. She says, "Anything dead coming back to life hurts."
Anything dead coming back to life hurts. That is incredibly powerful. When a child experiences overwhelming violation, they often have to numb parts of themselves just to survive the horror of it. They have to deaden their emotional responses.
It's the only way they can survive.
So as an adult, bringing sensation back to those numbed parts is going to sting. It's going to ache profoundly. This turbulence, this exhausting feeling of being entirely consumed by the trauma 24 hours a day, is a clinically recognized, highly documented part of the change process.
Right. It's expected.
It is not a sign that you are losing your mind or going crazy. It is actually a sign that your mind finally feels safe enough to let you process what it was completely incapable of processing when you were a small, defenseless child.
It makes me think of the quote from André Gide that the text highlights for reflection. "One does not discover new lands without consenting to lose sight of the shore for a very long time."
Lose sight of the shore. Wow.
The familiar ways of coping, even the unhealthy ones, the numbness, the dissociation, the workaholism, the denial, they were your shore. They were the solid ground that kept you alive and functioning. Letting go of those coping mechanisms leaves you feeling incredibly vulnerable, as if you were floating out in the open, turbulent ocean.
Yeah, without a life raft.
But true resilience means understanding that this scary, shoreless space is exactly where you must be. It is the necessary void where you make room to build a new, much stronger, much healthier self.
So if we were to summarize this first vital phase, the conscious decision to heal is daunting. It takes immense, staggering courage. And the initial phase, that emergency stage, is stormy and deeply, deeply overwhelming.
But it doesn't last forever.
Exactly. It is a temporary, natural, and medically recognized phase. The storm does not last forever, and it leads directly to incredible clarity and the vibrant color of a life that is truly, fully lived.
Let's distill the practical applications from this phase into 10 specific takeaways. If we pull the first major takeaway from this section, it is recognizing that making the decision to heal is a life-affirming choice that every single survivor deserves to make, regardless of their age or current life circumstance. It is never too late to choose yourself.
And building right off of that, a second vital application is shifting our definition of success. Healing is not about merely coping or figuring out how to quietly survive the day without breaking down. It is about reclaiming the full, vibrant, technicolor spectrum of your life. You deserve the color, not just the black and white.
Which brings us to a third point that I think is deeply validating. It is completely normal, and in fact expected, for the early stages of healing to feel like an emotional emergency or a natural disaster. You are not alone in feeling like your world has been turned upside down.
And as a fourth takeaway, we have to remember the plastic raincoat metaphor. When memories surface and expand, you cannot force them back into the tiny package, and you don't need to try. The goal is no longer to suppress them, but to gently begin to look at them.
For a fifth application, we have to acknowledge the vulnerability involved. You must consciously acknowledge that giving up your old, familiar coping mechanisms will leave you feeling raw and exposed. Understanding that this vulnerability is a necessary space for new growth helps lessen the panic when the numbness fades.
And practically speaking, our sixth takeaway is all about self-preservation. During the emergency stage, you must ruthlessly prioritize self-care. Create a safe, comfortable physical space in your home, drop any non-essential responsibilities or social obligations, and just focus on remembering to breathe.
A seventh crucial application is cognitive reinforcement. Remind yourself constantly, maybe even write it on a sticky note and put it on your bathroom mirror. I am not going crazy. This is a recognized, temporary part of the healing process. Seeing those words can anchor you during a flashback.
That flows perfectly into our eighth point, which is a structural boundary. Do not make major life changes during the height of the emergency stage. Do not quit your job on a whim. Do not abruptly end a long-term relationship in a moment of panic. Sit tight, ride out the storm, and wait for the emotional waters to calm before making massive decisions.
Our ninth takeaway is about agency. Pacing is critical. You have absolute permission to back off from going deeper into the trauma if you feel too destabilized. You can take a break from the deep work just to focus on your daily foundation and getting enough sleep.
And finally, our 10th application for this stage is the core truth you must hold on to. Crises are temporary. The all-consuming intensity, the feeling that the trauma is happening 24 hours a day, will pass. The emergency stage is a gateway, not a permanent destination.
As we move beyond the initial decision in the emergency stage, we encounter one of the most perplexing and painful aspects of recovery. Let's explore the complex journey of remembering.
This is such a sensitive area. We're going to explore the concept of traumatic memory. I want to reassure you right away, speaking directly to anyone listening, however you remember your trauma, whether it's in full, terrifyingly detailed narratives, in scattered, confusing fragments, or even if you have absolutely no direct memories at all right now, your experience is entirely valid. The shape of your memory does not dictate the truth of your pain.
This is an area where so many survivors struggle with intense self-doubt. Society, and often the legal system, expects memory to act like a digital video camera, recording a perfect chronological timeline with date stamps and clear audio.
Which is just not how the brain works.
Not even close. Neurological research and the sources we are looking at prove that traumatic memory doesn't work like that at all.
To understand why, our sources break down the concepts of traumatic amnesia and dissociation. We have to look at the brain's physiological and chemical response to overwhelming terror. Imagine a child in a profoundly terrifying situation.
They are completely trapped.
Exactly. When that child cannot physically escape the room because they are too small, because the door is locked, or because the abuser is an adult they depend on for survival, they're forced to escape the only way they can. They escape in their mind. They split off. This is dissociation.
It's a brilliant defense mechanism.
It really is. Their conscious awareness separates from the unbearable physical reality of what is happening to their body. This survival tactic is so profound that it actually changes how the brain stores information. The brain, flooded with stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, becomes physiologically incapable of absorbing, processing, and storing the event in a normal narrative way. The memory doesn't file neatly into the past events folder. It shatters into sensory fragments.
And the sources draw a crucial, illuminating contrast between this private, hidden trauma and public disasters, like earthquakes, floods, or hurricanes. The way society handles these two types of events fundamentally changes how the child processes them.
That distinction is everything. Think about it. When an earthquake happens, the walls shake, dishes fall and shatter, the ground rolls. It is terrifying. But immediately, the adults around the child grab them, pull them to safety, and say, "This is an earthquake. It is scary, but we are here."
The event is validated.
Yes, the event is named. It is publicly acknowledged by the community. And most importantly, it carries absolutely no shame. No child feels guilty that an earthquake happened. But childhood sexual abuse is an earthquake that happens in absolute terrifying secret.
An invisible earthquake.
Exactly. It is almost never named accurately for the child. The child is entirely isolated, often threatened with severe violence if they speak, and filled with a suffocating burden of shame. Because the abuse must be kept secret for the child to survive within the family structure, the child's brilliantly adaptive mind buries the knowledge of it. That is traumatic amnesia. It is not a failure of memory. It is a profound, life-saving survival mechanism.
But that brilliance creates incredibly confusing experiences for the survivor later in life. If we consider the survivor's perspective, they might ask, what if I only remember a specific, overwhelming smell, like a certain brand of aftershave, or the scratchy texture of a blanket? Or what if I just have a sudden, blinding feeling of panic when a door clicks shut?
Those are such common experiences.
And what happens when, as an adult, a survivor's body reacts with sheer terror during consensual physical intimacy, but their conscious mind is completely blank and they have no idea why they're crying? How do they make sense of a body that reacts to a story the mind doesn't know?
That phenomenon is exactly what the text calls sense memory. And it points to the profound truth that the body remembers. Memories are stored deeply in our cellular structure, in our physical reactions, and in our nervous system, even when the narrative mind has securely locked the storyline away.
The body keeps the score.
It does. The text shares a deeply moving, specific detail about a survivor who couldn't understand her own behavior as an adult. She would lie in bed, completely safe in her own home, but she would fixate on the tiny strip of light under her bedroom door. She couldn't sleep. Through the slow process of healing, she realized she wasn't just looking at the light, she was scanning it.
Scanning for danger.
Yes. Her sense memory was waiting for the shadow of footsteps to stop outside her childhood bedroom door. Her body remembered the visual of waiting for the abuser. That is sense memory. Understanding this also beautifully normalizes flashbacks. Flashbacks aren't the abuse happening again, even though they feel absolutely identical to the original terror. They are intrusive fragments, sometimes visual, sometimes just a sensation of floating away or splitting off from the body that are finally surfacing because the adult environment is safe enough for the mind to begin processing them.
If we step back and reflect on this, what's truly fascinating and deeply humbling is the sheer resilience of the human organism. Your body and your mind did exactly what they needed to do to keep you alive when you were small, trapped, and defenseless. Trusting these seemingly random fragments, trusting these essential emotional truths, even without a perfect start-to-finish storyline, is a profound act of honoring your own survival. It is thanking your mind for protecting you.
Yes, exactly. So, to summarize this complex journey of remembering, memory of deep trauma is rarely a perfect chronological timeline. It lives in the five senses, it lives in the tension of the muscles, and it lives in the sudden, unexplained spikes of emotional terror. Piecing it together and honoring those bodily signals instead of fighting them is a deeply brave act of self-discovery.
Let's draw out the 10 practical applications for navigating traumatic memory. The first vital takeaway here is adjusting your expectations. Traumatic memory is rarely chronological. It often returns in disjointed, fragmented images, sudden physical sensations, or intrusive feelings of dread that seem to have no trigger.
And understanding the mechanism behind that is our second takeaway. Dissociation is not a flaw. It is a brilliant, life-saving survival skill used by the brain when a physical situation is simply too terrifying for a child to endure consciously.
Which leads to our third application, validating the blank spaces. Traumatic amnesia is incredibly common and scientifically recognized. Forgetting the abuse for years or even decades does not mean it didn't happen. The forgetting was intentional protection by your brain.
Our fourth takeaway focuses on the physical self. Your body holds memories even when your conscious mind does not. Unexplained physical pain, sudden panic attacks, or protective physical responses like flinching are entirely valid clues to your history.
For a fifth practical application, we need to reframe how we view terrifying moments. Flashbacks are not the abuse happening to you again in the present moment, even though your heart is racing. They are old, stored memories finally coming to the surface because your mind feels safe enough now to process them.
And as a sixth takeaway, we must understand the unpredictability of this phase. Triggers can be absolutely anything. A passing smell, a specific tone of voice, a texture, or even a public crisis on the news, and it is completely normal to be caught off guard and overwhelmed by them.
Our seventh application is about how to react in those moments. When a memory or a heavy feeling surfaces, the safest and healthiest response is to find a secure physical space and simply let it come, rather than using heavy distractions or substances to aggressively force it back down.
The eighth takeaway is incredibly freeing for many survivors. You do not need a perfect, 100% accurate mental video of the events to validate the essential emotional truth of the violation you experienced. Your feelings are enough evidence.
And building on that freedom, the ninth application is a message of hope. It is entirely possible and highly necessary to heal from the devastating effects of trauma, even if you never recover or remember all the specific factual details of what happened to you.
Finally, the 10th takeaway for this chapter is a reminder of grace. Exploring your memories is an ongoing, gradual, and sometimes lifelong process. It is perfectly fine to be patient, to rest when you are tired, and to let the puzzle pieces come together naturally over time.
As we navigate these fragments of memory, survivors inevitably run into a massive internal wall. Let's explore the struggle of overcoming denial and learning to believe your own reality.
We are transitioning now into one of the most common yet most invisible hurdles of the entire healing process. This is the agonizing daily struggle to believe the abuse actually happened. If you are listening to this and you constantly doubt yourself, if you wake up one day certain of your past and the next day convinced you made it all up, we want to validate that deeply right now.
The self-doubt is overwhelming.
It is. Doubting your own reality is perhaps the single most universally shared experience among survivors of childhood abuse.
It really is an epidemic of self-doubt. And the sources we are drawing from spend a significant amount of time breaking down the function and the role of denial. People in the general public often think of denial as a character weakness, a stubborn refusal to face facts, or a form of lying to oneself. But the text frames denial entirely differently in a way that is deeply compassionate.
The reframing is essential. Denial is not a weakness. Denial is a highly effective, deeply necessary, self-protective respite.
A protective respite.
Exactly. When the pain of the past or the horror of the memory is simply too immense for a person's current psychological structure to carry, denial steps in to allow the survivor to function. It allows them to get out of bed in the morning, go to work, pay the electric bill, and care for their own children. Denial acts as a heavy shock absorber for the soul.
And hand in hand with this necessary denial is the coping mechanism of minimization.
Yes, minimization. We see so many courageous survivors who will recount horrific events and then immediately follow it up by saying, well, it wasn't that bad, other people had it worse, or it wasn't actual physical contact, it was just emotional, or it only happened that one time, so I shouldn't be this upset.
They invalidate their own experience.
We have to dismantle that minimization. A profound violation is not measured by a clinical checklist of specific physical acts. The damage is determined by the internal experience of the child, the shattering of their boundaries, the profound betrayal of trust by a caregiver, the complete loss of safety in their own home. That betrayal is what causes the lasting psychological damage, regardless of the physical logistics of the abuse.
If we connect this struggle to the family dynamic, it raises a pivotal question that so many survivors wrestle with. Why is it so incredibly hard for survivors to trust their own reality? Why do they doubt themselves so aggressively, especially when they grew up in families that projected the image of a perfectly happy home to the outside world?
Because families have an immense, almost absolute power to manipulate reality for a child. A child's entire understanding of the world is formed by the adults who raise them.
They are the child's reality.
Precisely. If an abuser or a complicit parent who knows what is happening but refuses to stop it constantly tells a child, you're imagining things, or you have an overactive imagination, or that's just how we show affection in this family, or even simply acts perfectly normal and asks what's for breakfast after a night of absolute horror, the child's internal reality is completely warped. They are forced to believe the adults over their own senses.
It creates a deep internal split.
It does. Healing involves the painful process of stepping outside that manufactured family bubble. It involves looking objectively at your isolated childhood and comparing it to what a genuinely healthy, protective, and respectful environment should actually look like. You have to learn to recognize the abuse for what it objectively was, completely separate from the family's deeply entrenched manufactured narrative of normalcy.
It's a monumental task. It's about reclaiming the authority of your own perception. I love the quote from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke that the text uses as the touchstone here. Have patience toward all that is unresolved in your heart. Try to love the questions themselves. The reflection we want to offer you here is to gently encourage you to trust your own pain.
Trust your own pain.
If there's deep, unexplained anguish in your life, if there are severe, disruptive symptoms of trauma in your daily existence today, there is a legitimate reason for it. You did not invent the symptoms out of thin air. Your pain is the proof that an injury occurred.
To summarize this deeply internal battle, you and only you are the ultimate, final expert on your own life and your own internal experience. Believing yourself is not a light switch that you flip on once and for all. It is a gradual, sometimes oscillating awakening. And your very real pain is proof enough that something in your past deeply requires healing and attention.
Let's draw out the 10 practical takeaways for overcoming denial and believing your reality. The first major application is acknowledging the necessity of this step. Facing the reality of your abuse without softening or minimizing it is an incredibly difficult but absolutely vital requirement for achieving true, lasting healing.
And as a second takeaway, we must reframe how we view our own defenses. Denial is a highly effective, intelligent survival mechanism that gave you a necessary respite from unbearable emotional pain so you could continue to function in the world. Do not punish yourself for having utilized it.
The third application normalizes the inconsistency. Moving in and out of believing your own memories, knowing it's true on Monday and doubting it entirely by Wednesday, is a completely normal, expected part of the early stages of recovery.
Which brings us to a fourth, deeply empowering takeaway. You do not need external corroboration, you do not need legal proof, and you certainly do not need your family's admission of guilt to validate your own truth and begin your healing process.
Our fifth application addresses the habit of minimizing. The true severity of childhood abuse is not measured by the specific physical acts, but by the betrayal of trust, the broken boundaries, and the lasting, suffocating impact on your spirit.
And building on that, our sixth takeaway is crucial for those who suffered covert abuse. Even if the abuse only happened once or was entirely non-physical, like emotional incest, inappropriate leering, or the chronic crossing of privacy boundaries, it is deeply damaging and your pain is entirely valid.
The seventh application is a warning against a common trap. Do not compare your trauma to others. Someone else suffering a seemingly worse trauma in a movie or a book does not invalidate, lessen, or cancel out the reality of your own pain.
Our eighth takeaway offers a different way to find evidence. Look at your life today. Your current symptoms, your specific fears, your reactions to intimacy, and your relationship patterns are powerful, telling indicators of the reality of your past.
The ninth application offers immense relief. It is entirely okay if you are never 100% certain of every single factual detail of the abuse. You can successfully heal from the damage and the symptoms that you unequivocally know are present in your life right now.
And the 10th, defining takeaway for this chapter. Above all else, you must consciously practice learning to trust yourself and your own perceptions. You, not your family or society, are the highest authority on your own lived experience.
Take a breath with us. You are doing great, and we're moving through some of the heaviest material. Let's step now into the transformative power of breaking the silence and reclaiming your anger.
This is where the energy really begins to shift in the healing journey. We are transitioning to the power of finding your voice and accessing your righteous, justified anger. The core defining theme of this section is profound and simple. Secrecy always protects the abuser, while truth always protects the survivor.
It's a massive shift in perspective. But breaking that silence, opening your mouth, and speaking the words out loud involves navigating massive societal and familial taboos.
It does. Child sexual abuse is an epidemic that thrives almost exclusively in an atmosphere of enforced silence. Survivors are silenced in so many multifaceted ways. Sometimes it is through direct, terrifying physical threats from the abuser, but often it is through a lack of belief when a child tentatively does try to tell an adult, or through complex, suffocating family dynamics that prioritize the family's public reputation and cohesion over the child's physical and emotional safety.
The pressures to stay quiet are enormous.
Yes, and the sources highlight very specific, uniquely painful hurdles regarding breaking silence. For example, the text shares Rachel's story, which illustrates the intense cultural, ethnic, or religious pressures to protect the community. For Rachel, telling an outsider, like a therapist or a police officer, felt like a fundamental betrayal of her own people, which added a massive, agonizing layer of guilt to her silence. She wasn't just afraid of her abuser, she was afraid of destroying her community's standing.
That double bind is so incredibly painful.
And the text also deeply and sensitively addresses the profound societal disbelief surrounding abuse committed by women and mothers. Because society has a rigid mythological view of women as inherently pure and nurturing, survivors of female abusers face an agonizing, double-thick wall of shock, denial, and even mockery from others when they try to speak out about their mothers or female relatives.
And right alongside the terrifying act of breaking the silence is the necessary reclaiming of anger. If we think about the survivor's perspective, this raises a huge question. For a survivor who has been systematically taught from childhood to be quiet, compliant, and a peacemaker, how do they safely access anger without feeling like they are becoming a monster themselves?
We have to completely reframe what anger is. In the context of healing, anger is not a destructive force. Anger is a profound, illuminating healing tool. Historically, survivors have been forced to turn all their natural defensive anger inward.
It becomes toxic when it's turned inward.
Exactly. When a child is abused, their body naturally produces an anger response to fight off the threat. But when the child realizes they cannot possibly express that anger at the giant adult who controls their food, their shelter, and their life, that anger has nowhere to go but inward. The child becomes angry at themselves. That inward directed anger is exactly what causes deep chronic depression, profound self-loathing, and severe self-destructive behaviors like addiction or self-harm.
But reversing that flow is where the healing is.
Yes. Reversing that flow, directing that anger outward toward the abuser who actually deserves it, toward the profound injustice of what happened, is a healthy, fierce, and entirely protective life force. As for the intense fear of telling someone your secret, telling safe, carefully chosen allies is a leap of faith that actively shatters the power of shame.
And if someone reacts poorly,
If they change the subject or express disbelief, that poor reaction is entirely about their limitations, their discomfort with pain, and their psychological defensiveness. It is absolutely not a reflection of your worth or the validity of your story. There is a quote from a survivor in the text that captures this awakening so powerfully. When I'm angry, it's because I know I'm worth being angry about.
that's such a beautiful, triumphant realization. I know I'm worth being angry about. It perfectly aligns with the quote from the author James Baldwin that we use for reflection here. The victim who articulates the situation of the victim is no longer a victim. He or she is a threat. Speaking the truth aloud, refusing to carry the secret anymore, and allowing yourself to feel the heat of justified anger fundamentally reestablishes your power. It reestablishes your humanity and your boundaries. It changes your entire stance in the world from a target to a force.
Yes, exactly. So, to summarize the immense power of this phase, breaking the silence by sharing your truth with safe, vetted people literally dissolves the heavy, suffocating burden of shame. And accessing your righteous, protective anger is a profound psychological milestone. It is the ultimate sign of deep, returning self-worth and self-love.
Let's extract the 10 practical takeaways for breaking the silence and reclaiming anger. The first major application is recognizing the environment where trauma lives. Child sexual abuse thrives almost exclusively in secrecy and silence. Therefore, speaking your truth, strictly at your own pace and to safe people, is an act of profound personal liberation.
And as a second takeaway, we must prepare for the reactions of others. A negative, disbelieving, or awkward reaction from someone you choose to tell reflects their own emotional limitations and defensiveness, not a flaw or a falsehood in your story.
Which perfectly leads into our third application regarding disclosure. Choose your allies incredibly carefully when disclosing your past. Do not cast your pearls before swine. Look for people who have consistently proven over time that they respect your boundaries and care for your emotional well-being.
The fourth takeaway empowers you in those conversations. You have the absolute right to set the terms of your disclosure. You can explicitly say to a friend, I just need a listening ear right now. I do not want advice. Or you can ask for a specific type of support. You are in control of the conversation.
Our fifth application is a vital validation for a specific group of survivors. Abuse committed by women and mothers is a painful, widespread, and devastating reality. Do not let societal myths about maternal purity invalidate the deep, complex betrayal of this specific type of trauma.
The sixth takeaway addresses systemic hurdles. Cultural, ethnic, and religious pressures often strongly demand silence in order to protect the group's public image, but your absolute first allegiance must be to your own healing, safety, and sanity.
As a seventh practical application, we must redefine an emotion. Anger is a natural, healthy, and completely justified physiological and emotional response to having your personal boundaries deeply violated. It is proof that your protective instincts are alive.
And the eighth takeaway explains the mechanics of that emotion. Turning anger inward leads directly to chronic depression and self-destruction. Consciously directing it outward toward the injustice and the perpetrator clears the internal emotional space for true self-acceptance.
Our ninth application marks a moment of celebration and recovery. Feeling genuinely angry about your abuse is a profound, healing milestone. It means you finally, at a cellular level, recognize that you did not deserve what happened to you.
And finally, the 10th takeaway offers a practical, safe exercise. Writing an unsent, entirely unfiltered, rage-filled letter to an abuser and then safely destroying it is a highly effective, neurologically recognized way to process and release toxic anger from your body.
Moving forward on this path, we enter a phase that deals with the external world and the internal past simultaneously. Let's discuss disclosures to family, the inner child, and the true meaning of forgiveness.
This chapter wades into some of the most complex, emotionally charged, and highly debated topics in the entire recovery process. We are looking at confronting the past directly, learning to care for the wounded, younger parts of yourself, and navigating the incredibly confusing, often toxic societal pressure surrounding the concept of forgiveness.
Let's start with the idea of direct confrontation. The text refers to this specific action as the truth-telling conversation.
Yes, the truth-telling conversation. This refers to a direct, usually planned confrontation with an abuser or with family members who are complicit by knowing about the abuse and failing to stop it.
But we need to be very clear about this.
Extremely clear. Here is the most important critical thing we can tell you about this. This confrontation is entirely 100% optional. It is never, under any circumstances, a required step for healing. Some survivors heal profoundly without ever speaking to their abuser again.
It is about what the survivor needs, not what the family wants.
Exactly. However, if a survivor consciously chooses to do this, it must only be done to empower the survivor. The goal is claiming your voice and standing in your truth in the exact physical or emotional space where your voice was originally stolen. It is absolutely not about forcing an apology. It is not about expecting the abuser to suddenly break down, confess, and change their ways. You cannot control their reaction. They may deny it, they may attack you, they may play the victim, but you can control your own voice.
And that ties into the internal work, right? The
Yeah.
text introduces the vital concept of the child within.
Yes, the child within. Healing requires actively building a loving, fiercely protective, ongoing relationship with the vulnerable child version of you who actually endured the trauma alone. You have to consciously become the protective, loving adult for that internal child that you desperately needed but never had.
And that concept of protecting the child within leads directly into the most misunderstood, heavily loaded concept in all of trauma recovery: forgiveness. If we look at this from a survivor's perspective, the questions are agonizing. What about the intense pressure from religious institutions or well-meaning friends to just forgive and forget? And what if a survivor still deeply loves the family members who failed to protect them? How do they grieve the fantasy of the family they never had?
The pressure to forgive and forget the abuser, especially when it is pushed prematurely by religious or societal sources, can be incredibly damaging. It often completely short-circuits the healing process by forcing the survivor to bypass their necessary anger and grief.
It's a form of spiritual bypassing.
It really is. True healing requires fundamentally redefining what forgiveness actually means. The most important, most vital forgiveness you will ever practice is forgiving yourself. You must forgive yourself for whatever coping mechanisms you had to use to survive, for the times you froze, or for the ways you acted out.
And what about the paradox of loving the family that failed you?
We have to learn to hold space for duality. The text shares Ray's story, a survivor who loved her grandfather deeply. He was her mentor, he taught her skills, he made her laugh, but she had to simultaneously acknowledge the horrific reality that he was also her abuser. It is possible, though painful, to hold both truths. And regarding the family structure, grieving the loss of the ideal mother or the perfect, safe family is a massive, necessary step. You have to actively mourn the safe family and the innocent childhood you absolutely deserve but did not get in order to finally accept the stark reality of the family you actually have.
The reflection we want to offer here is about the immense, surprising relief of taking back your control. When a survivor finally, painfully gives up the deeply held fantasy that their family will magically wake up one day, apologize profusely, and become a healthy, perfect unit, they go through a period of intense, devastating grief. But on the other side of that grief, they release a massive, exhausting emotional burden. They stop trying to change the unchangeable, and they reclaim all that wasted energy to use for building their own present life.
To summarize this deeply emotional, complex chapter, confrontations, if you choose to initiate them, are entirely about exercising your voice, regardless of the abuser's reaction. Your primary daily job is to fiercely protect the child within you, to genuinely and deeply grieve what you lost, and to direct all your profound capacity for forgiveness inward toward yourself.
Let's extract the 10 practical takeaways for navigating disclosures, the inner child, and forgiveness. The first major application is a boundary regarding confrontation. Confronting an abuser or complicit family members is an entirely optional choice meant solely to empower you. It is never a mandatory requirement for achieving full healing.
And the second takeaway guides you if you do choose that path. If you do choose to have a truth-telling conversation, define clear personal goals for your own expression, like simply saying the words out loud rather than expecting the abuser to apologize, validate your pain, or suddenly change.
Which leads to our third application about physical and emotional safety. Protecting yourself is paramount. You have the absolute, undeniable right to set firm boundaries, to choose a safe public location for a conversation, or to walk away entirely and cut contact with dangerous family members.
The fourth takeaway shifts the focus inward. Profound healing requires developing deep, active, daily compassion and empathy for the inner child who had to endure the abuse completely alone and terrified.
As a fifth application, we must validate the grieving process. You must allow yourself the time and space to fully mourn the loss of the safe, loving family and the innocent, carefree childhood you rightfully deserve but simply did not get.
The sixth takeaway normalizes a very confusing emotional state. It is possible and very common to hold paradoxical feelings, deeply loving someone in your family for their good qualities, while being legitimately furiously enraged about their betrayal and abuse.
Our seventh application tackles the societal pressure directly. You are under absolutely no obligation to forgive your abuser. Premature or externally forced forgiveness is often a form of denial that can severely short-circuit your actual healing process.
And the eighth takeaway redefines the goal. The most essential, transformative, and necessary form of forgiveness is forgiving yourself for any and all coping mechanisms you utilized to survive your trauma when you had no other tools.
The ninth application is painful but liberating. Giving up the deeply held fantasy that your family will one day wake up and be perfect is agonizingly painful, but it finally frees you to live authentically in reality.
And finally, the 10th takeaway for this chapter. Letting go of the impossible need to control or change other people allows you to focus your precious life energy entirely on creating a safe, beautiful, and fulfilling life for yourself today.
As we integrate all of these massive shifts in perspective, we arrive at a beautiful, hopeful stage. Let's discuss resolution, spiritual reconnection, and the concept of moving on.
Welcome to the stage of resolution. I want to be very, very clear about what this word actually means in the context of deep trauma. Healing is not about erasing the scars. It is not about experiencing a sudden amnesia and pretending the trauma never happened. You cannot undo history.
Resolution isn't forgetting.
Right. Resolution means doing the work to ensure that those deep scars no longer dictate your daily life, and that they no longer shoot with agonizing, paralyzing pain when they are accidentally touched by the events of the present.
The source text uses a truly beautiful, evocative metaphor here to explain what it actually means to move on from trauma.
It really does. It uses the metaphor of the traditional Russian nesting doll.
The Matryoshka doll.
Yes, exactly. Often, survivors think healing means cutting away the damaged parts of themselves and throwing them in the trash. But the nesting doll metaphor changes that. When you reach a state of resolution, you realize you are whole. The wiser, stronger, compassionate, present adult self is the outermost, largest doll. And safely inside you, protected by that strong adult shell, you carry all the past versions of yourself. The wounded, terrified child, the furious, acting-out teenager, the confused, numb young adult. They are all held safely within you. They aren't abandoned or amputated. They are integrated.
That integration is so peaceful. And the sources also discuss the returning role of spirituality. This is vital to clarify for many survivors. Spirituality in this context does not necessarily mean returning to organized religion, especially if religious doctrine was used as a tool to abuse or silence you.
That's a crucial distinction.
Spirituality here means finding an inner stillness. It's a felt connection to the life force within you, a quiet faith in the natural healing process of the universe. One survivor beautifully described this sensation as finally looking up and seeing a break in the heavy clouds.
A break in the heavy clouds. But moving into this phase of peace actually brings up an unexpected, very common fear for survivors. If we look at this from their perspective, after spending years, perhaps decades, whose entire identity has been shaped by the trauma and the exhausting daily fight to survive it, who are you without it?
The identity shift is jarring.
It is. How do you transition from a life defined by surviving a crisis to a life that is actually just thriving? It's a very real, very disorienting fear. Survivors often talk in therapy about an addiction to crisis. When your nervous system has been forced to run on high adrenaline and sheer terror for your entire childhood, a state of actual peace can feel incredibly boring, or ironically, it can feel dangerous, like the calm before a terrible storm.
Because peace feels unfamiliar.
Exactly. And there is also a profound, quiet fear that if you actually get better and stop hurting, you are somehow abandoning that wounded child inside who suffered so much. But getting better isn't abandoning the child. Getting better is actually finally building a safe, warm home for that child to rest in. The transition to thriving involves a psychological and physical concept called embodiment. Learning to live safely, comfortably, and joyfully inside your own physical body again. It's the ability to stay present in the moment without dissociating.
And it involves finding those small moments of joy.
Yes, cultivating profound, simple joy. The text uses the beautiful concept of gracias a la vida, giving thanks to life. It's about finding deep gratitude for simple, previously unnoticed things. The shape of the alphabet, the warmth of the sun, the ritual of making a cup of tea. Healing isn't a straight linear line to a definitive finish line. It's an upward spiral. You might circle around and revisit old feelings of grief or anger, but when you do, you're looking at them from a higher, stronger, more secure vantage point.
If we reflect on the bigger picture of what resolution means, think about the massive, incalculable amount of human energy that untreated trauma demands. When a person is just trying to survive the day, 100% of their vital energy goes into simply treading water so they don't drown.
Just keeping their head above the surface.
Exactly. When you reach a place of resolution, all that survival energy is suddenly freed up. It is released back to you. It allows a person to creatively, lovingly, and joyfully contribute to the world around them in ways they never thought possible.
To provide a final summary for this stage of the journey, true resolution means deep integration. You accept the complexity and the inherent paradoxes of life. You feel genuinely safe and present in your own physical body, and you are retethered beautifully and securely to that broader human community.
Let's look at our final 10 practical takeaways, focusing on resolution and moving forward. The first major application is defining the goal. Resolution does not mean forgetting the abuse or pretending it didn't hurt. It means the memories become a manageable, integrated part of your personal history, rather than a constant, overwhelming daily crisis.
And as a second takeaway, we must visualize the path. Healing is not a straight line, but an upward spiral. You may periodically revisit old, painful feelings, but you do so from a higher, much stronger, and much safer level of self-understanding.
Which brings us to our third application, validating a strange sensation. It is entirely normal to feel an internal addiction to intensity and to feel a strange sense of emptiness or letdown when the daily crisis of trauma finally begins to fade from your life. Peace takes practice.
The fourth takeaway addresses a common internal guilt. Moving on and finding joy does not mean you are abandoning the wounded child inside you. It means you are finally providing that internal child with the safe, stable, happy home they always needed and deserved.
As a fifth practical application, we look to the physical self. A major, beautiful sign of true resolution is embodiment, the returning ability to stay present, to feel your physical sensations safely, and to actually find genuine pleasure and comfort in your own body.
The sixth takeaway is about accepting reality. True healing involves deep integration. It is accepting that life is full of complex paradoxes and that you have the capacity to hold both the memory of past pain and profound present joy simultaneously.
Our seventh application redefines connection. Spirituality in the context of healing is about finding a place of inner stillness and trusting the resilient life force within you, which is an experience entirely independent of organized religion.
And the eighth takeaway offers a daily practice. Cultivating deep gratitude for simple, daily sensory moments, the gracias a la vida concept, helps ground your nervous system in the present and solidify your hard-won peace of mind.
The ninth application removes an immense burden. Accepting that healing is a lifelong, evolving journey of growth completely relieves the immense, unfair, and impossible pressure to be perfectly fixed right now.
And finally, the 10th takeaway for our entire deep dive is a reminder of your impact. Your personal healing is an act of global importance. As you heal, the immense energy you previously used just for survival can be beautifully redirected toward creativity, love, and actively changing the world around you.
That is so profoundly true.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, we want to gently remind you of one undeniable objective truth. Taking this journey, bravely facing the fragmented memories, allowing yourself to feel the righteous anger, navigating the impossible family dynamics, and tenderly tending to the wounded inner child is the most courageous, difficult work a human being can possibly do. It is nothing short of heroic.
I want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to just mull over as you go about your day or as you rest tonight. Imagine for a moment if all the energy you've had to use your entire life just to hang on by your fingernails, just to survive the weight of the past, was suddenly freed up. Think of the immense, staggering resilience you've had to build in the dark. Now ask yourself, what will you build with that immense, unbreakable strength now that you are finally stepping into the light?
Thank you so much for trusting us and joining us for this deep dive. Please be exceedingly gentle and patient with yourself today. Take care.